Oh, just so you guys know, we're just doing this for internal purposes. If you have any questions later on, I'll turn off the recording if you want me to. I'm going to wait for just a few more people to jump in, and then I'll start the meeting. Like I was saying to just a few people, or to the people first entered a second ago, we have a lot of good information to share with you this afternoon. We're excited about what's been going on in terms of trends lately in construction. We're seeing kind of a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm happy to go over that with you. And let's see here if we can get some more people on board. All right, I'm going to start the meeting now. I might be onboarding people during the meeting just so that everyone knows ahead of time. All right, so first of all, thank you everyone for showing up today. I'm looking forward, like I just said, to sharing some of this information with you. The webinar today is called Rebound, Restaurants, Retail, and Hotels Coming Back in 2022. Basically, what I've noticed before we go into the data is that the bottom line, and what you're going to see throughout this presentation, is that our numbers and numbers that we're detecting in construction in general this year are up significantly in comparison to what they were from last year. We think that's a very good sign, and we'll start digging into the data now that a few more people have come on board. So first of all, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Rebound trends. The Construct to Lead research department has detected a strong rebound in retail, restaurant, and hotel planning, as well as new construction planning in general, since the start of March 2022. This is evident when compared to the same time period from 2021. Here, let me get some more people on board here. And let's look at the data here. Total new projects from March to April 22nd. And we're talking about
conference now. Mic rack, and then what to do to cover up those the seismic gap between the buildings.
All right, thank you. So let's go into the data from this year and compare it to the data that we saw from last year.
Around the doors, or
is there someone who's logged on who could you mute your microphone?
Yeah.
I can't tell who it is, but
it's always a tricky one. That's a split face, right?
Yeah, I attached some photos to it. Okay. Yeah.
Someone has their microphone on, and I'd appreciate it if you could mute it so we could go through the presentation. When we're done, if people want to unmute it, or if you want to unmute it, if you have a question that comes up, that's fine. But just don't take any calls or anything while we're doing the webinar. Thank you, though. Let's go to the data, though. Let's go back to what we're talking about. So let's compare March 1st, 2021 to April 22nd, 2021 with March 1st, 2022 to April 22nd, 2022. So we have an exact same time period that we can compare our data for. Because I personally have noticed a little bit of an uptick in the data here. So hotels for that same time period in 2021, where someone else is getting in now. Hotels for that same time period in 2021, we added 108 hotels to our system, all right? From March 1st to April 22nd of this year, and of course, the data cutoff date for creating these slides is April 22nd, we added 184 hotels. That's a pretty significant jump right there. We see another similar jump when it comes to restaurants. So from March 1st to April 22nd, 2021, we added 293 restaurants. From March 1st to April 22nd, 2022, we added 455 restaurants to our system. When it comes to retail, there's also another large jump. Again, it's comparison to the same exact time periods. You go from 739 to 1,152 retail projects. Now, keep in mind that many retail projects are within larger multifamily developments, mixed-use projects, et cetera. But that still shows an increase in demand, or at least planning for these types of projects there. There are a couple different things that I think we can attribute this to. Largely reductions in COVID restrictions and other things that have to do with a resurgence in travel. But again, whatever the cause is, and I can't tell you that for sure, though I do think it's largely related to changes in COVID restrictions, you do see a significant uptick in planning for the kind of projects that we're not doing well under COVID. Mostly the building types that deal with hospitality, dining, or travel, things like that. This is a very good and strong sign, I think, here. The value of projects, what I think is very important though, is that the value of projects has also gone up during this time period and compared to the same time span of 2021. So we see a jump in these kind of hospitality related projects. We're also seeing a huge jump in the value of those projects. So from January 1st through April 22nd of 2021, throughout all those first couple of months of the year last year, we added 1,155 projects to the Construct Elite system that were valued between 25 and 100 million. So those are good projects, but they're not like the highest value projects. For that same period in this year, we added 2,479 projects. And again, that's projects between 25 and 100 million dollars. Now, just in the last 2 months, and again, all this data cut off at April 22nd, we added 613 projects between 25 and 100 million. And in the last 2 months, and again, we've added almost 1,300 projects that were between 25 and 100 million. And in fact, I think since I pulled this data at the end of last week, we've probably gone well beyond 1,300 projects. So that, as you can see, just by looking at these, just the graph itself, this is a pretty significant jump in high value of high value project planning. And again, these are not projects that were already in the system beforehand that we're just updating. These are projects that are new projects that we found and added to the system. When you go to even the more expensive projects estimated over $100 million. Between January and April 22nd of 2021, excuse me, we added 277 projects over $100 million, which is still pretty good when you consider all the things that were going on during that time period. And the fact that usually the first quarter of the year is the slowest period in terms of new project announcements, new projects being filed with city and county authorities. So just naturally in our industry, usually there's a taper in projects. But for that same period in 2022, we added 537 projects over 100 million. Some of them, we've added a lot that are just under $1 billion or multiple in terms of maybe 400, 500, 600 million dollars. Just in the last, since March 1st, April 22nd, we added 124 projects over 100 million. And we did in 2021, but in 2022, we added 280 projects over 100 million. I think that might be over 300 at this point right now, since we're at the very end of April. So if you look at these numbers, sir, we already saw in the previous slide that there's been an uptick in hospitality related projects in terms of the new planning, but we're seeing a huge jump in the value of these projects. Some of that might have to do with the fact that we retabulate our estimating charts due to inflation, but it still would not account for such a large jump. So my interpretation of this is that a lot of projects that were kind of maybe on the edge of being announced last year, but were not announced, are now being kind of, the developers are finally moving forward with them. They're finally filing with the county and the city in terms of developers, permits, getting site plans submitted, things like that. So now we're detecting them more. But there's this huge jump in projects that I think is a good sign. So let's look at the next page in terms of data. Hotel data is also rising. We all know it's not a secret that hotels were hurt the most by COVID restrictions. But we're also seeing a bump in hotel planning this year for the same time period. So I think this is actually the data for, this is the total data for the year. In terms of hotels between 5 and 25 million. Now we all know a lot of your franchised hotels come in between $4 and $5 million. But in terms of hotels between 5 and 25 million, we went from 122 for this time period in 2021 to 146. That's a modest jump. In terms of 25 to 100 million, we went from 78 to 98 hotels. And then from hotels of over 100 million, 29 to 32. Now, again, all these numbers is a modest jump. It's not as large as what we're seeing with other project types, but it's still something that I think is worth noting. And hopefully this trend will continue into the end of the second quarter and into the third quarter. Again, in this industry, the third quarter is usually the strongest quarter in terms of reporting on new projects due to when they're announced and when work and planning starts. So if we've already started off the first quarter into the beginning of the second quarter with these numbers, I think that's a fairly good sign. Another thing I want to talk about, and this kind of goes over some of the data that I covered in my last webinar at the beginning of the year, has been the fact that where we're detecting new construction projects matches data that we have from the government in terms of census data, in terms of where people are moving within the country. This is a good sign. It means that the Construct Elite team is actually following, you know, they know that where there's smoke, there's fire. So they're following the breadcrumbs and getting projects in where there's actual population growth. Population growth, of course, leads to new residential construction, which requires new construction in all the other fields, schools, restaurants, housing, things like that, or retail, things like that. So what we're seeing is there's another interesting trend that has emerged this year that has been a change in position among the states in terms of total new projects being planned, with Florida overtaking California as Cal's #2 state by projects in the database. This dovetails with trends revealed in a late 2021 report from the Census Bureau. So historically, Texas has always been the major state in terms of new project generation. But California has been behind it just because they're the two largest states. California actually has a larger population than Texas by about 10 million. But again, it's not just total population that matters in terms of construction trends, it's population growth. So the number I'm always talking to the researchers about is look at your population for a state and then also look at where people are moving. So in the case of Texas, you have a base population of 29.5 million people, at least in 2021. The Census Bureau between the middle of 2020 and the middle of 2021, according to their latest report, detected that over 300,000 people had moved to the state of Texas. So the state of Texas gained a small city. A result of this, of course, is that already this year, at least as of April 22nd, there are 3,306 new construction projects planned in Texas. Florida, again, another case where you have a population just under 22 million, but it gained 211,000 people during that same time period. So again, the equivalent of a small city. And we've picked up this year 947 construction projects in Florida. I think it might be just under 1,000 by now, because again, the state is a few days old. California has historically always been a strong second to Texas. It's always been a second to Texas. In recent years, not as robustly. But California has the largest population of all the states at just over 39 million. But according to the Census Bureau, it lost 261,000 people between 2020 and 2021. Now, we still have a high number of projects being detected in California, 879. A lot of that is, even though people are moving out of the state, there was already a huge built-in demand for residential units in California. We're all very well aware of the housing shortages in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Well, the side effect of that is even if people move out of the state, you still have that pent-up demand for new construction in terms of residential. You also have a lot of immigration from Latin America into California as well. So even when people leave the state, there's still demand for new construction in the state of California. North Carolina has been one of these other southern states that has remained strong for us for a long time. So far this year, we're at, I think by now the data has gone up to over 500 projects in North Carolina. They're another state that added, they added 94,000 people in 2020 to 2021. I believe that North Carolina's, their numbers are going to jump as we go into the late spring into summer, just because in Texas and Florida, people are filing for new construction projects and announcing things all year round or working all year round. North Carolina does have a little bit of a thaw that has to take place. So North Carolina, I do expect to see a little bit of jump in, but it'll still probably remain as the #4 state throughout the year. Another thing that I think is worth pointing out is that for the purpose of this graphic here, I combined all the provinces from Canada. So even though Canada obviously is not a state, it would come in if it was treated as a state as our the state with the 5th most number of new projects being generated. Canada has about the same population as California. It does have a higher growth rate. I haven't gotten the latest data from the Canadian government, but it is in the positive, whereas California is in the negative. So I think in the long term, as the year spans out, and as we get more firsthand contacts in Canada and more business partners in Canada, I expect the number of projects in Canada to at least equal California over time. Now, we didn't include it in the chart, but I'll round out the other states that we're seeing a lot of action in. Ohio would come in at #6. New York at #7. New York was suffering throughout all of 2020 and 2021. So New York has made its way back into the top 10, though it's still not it's still not high enough to match what its population is. Under that, we have Georgia, always a very strong state for development, Arizona, and then Tennessee. So of course, that also matches data that I talked about in our last webinar, where the Census Bureau has pointed out that this US South region has seen the largest growth in population just in terms of native birth, but also a migration between the states. So it's not an accident that our top 10 states are kind of filled with a lot of these southern states, plus areas that have a lot of naturally high population. Excuse me, I'm just going back on accident to that page. But let's talk about the data within those states. I talked about how Florida leapfrogged over California. The data from California is still pretty good for this year. So this change in the position of the states can be tracked in data from the same time periods from 2021 and 2022. So again, we're comparing data from January 1st, 2021 to April 22nd, 2022, and comparing that to January 1st, 2022 to April 22nd, 2022. And I just want to say right now, I know a lot of people jumped into this webinar late. So at the very end, I'll review all the data from the beginning and move it forward so you guys can get in on that action as well. But the bottom line is what we're seeing in this comparison between California and Florida is that even though Florida jumped ahead of California for this time period, California is still doing better than it was last year. So last year, California, up until April 22nd was at 666 projects. This year in that time period, it's at 879 projects. Florida, of course, leapfrogged from 628 to 947. That trend, I can tell you from the very end of last year, Florida was already starting to pull ahead. But throughout the year, California stayed ahead last year. Now we see a clear where week after week, we're getting more projects from Florida. And that gap seems to be widening. But that being said, California is still performing better than it did last year. Now, of course, we've talked about all the hospitality-related projects so far, and we've talked about the value of projects. But what the bottom line, the bread and butter of this industry is that residential is still the real driver. And I think actually the data here is from the beginning of the year till April 2nd and not March to April 22nd. But the bottom line is that we are seeing an increase, even though we're seeing an increase in residential as well as the other types of projects. So there are several trends from 2021 that have continued into 2022. Last year, residential projects accounted for approximately 44.4% of the over 30,000 new projects added to the Cal system. And residential continues to lead new project orders. Now this year, we're already well over 10,000 new projects. I think we're closer to 12 or 13. And we're likely to come up just under 40,000 new projects for the year, if not more. But we can see that even in our residential data. Whereas residential was our big hitter last year, 44.4% of the projects. And we're already about 1,000 projects ahead of where we were last year in terms of multifamily residential. When you look at combined residential, which is multifamily, townhomes, and single family, then the difference is even more extreme. So all of these fields, all these construction types are having a good year this year. There's been a resurgence across the board. Medical has been a little bit softer than it was the years before, but especially when it comes to any kind of entertainment-related construction. And I'll loop back for the people who joined the webinar late, I'll loop back and show some of that data again. There has been a resurgence in that kind of planning. And so I'm going to kind of just do that quickly, and then maybe if anyone has a question, now you can unmute, and then you can kind of ask that question. But again, for the people, I think half of our people in the webinar joined late. The big rebound trend we've noticed this year is that our team has detected a strong rebound in retail, restaurant, and hotel planning when compared to the same time period last year. So from March, and then this has especially occurred within the last 2 months. So from March 1st to April 22nd of this year, in each of these categories, we've seen a jump. So if you compare that to the data from 2021, you go from 108 hotels to 2022, 184 hotels. Now, hotels in general, I wrote some of these numbers down before the meeting. We're over 345 hotels as of right now for our system. Restaurants, between March 1st, April 22nd, 2021, you were at 293 restaurants. So far this year, in that time period, we're at 455. Now, altogether in the Cal system, when I checked a few minutes ago, we're at 998 restaurants. So we might even be over 1,000 restaurants at this point for this year, which is a significant increase from last year. Retail, March 1st, 2021 to April 22nd, 2021, comparing it to the same time period in 2022, you have a giant jump from retail 739 to 1,152. And according to the data I wrote down before the webinar started, we had just hit 2,470 retail projects, which is very strong. The other thing that's very important, and this is important for the people who jumped in late to take away, is that the value of these projects has really jumped up. So between January 1st and April 22nd of last year, we had 1,155 projects between 25 and 100 million. This year, for that same time period, we had just under 2,500 projects between 25 and 100 million. I'm sure it's well over 2,500 by now. Again, that jump also was obvious during the period of the last 2 months. When it comes to projects estimated over 100 million, and these are, when you come to a project over 100 million, you're talking about high rises, large mixed use developments, towers, large industrial or logistics complexes. In that case, we also see a jump from, again, January 1st to April 22nd in 2021 was 277 projects. This year, for the same time period, it's 537. That jump even becomes more extreme when you look at the numbers from the last 2 months. You go from 124 projects to 280 projects over 180 million or 100 million. So again, we had a giant jump in March and April when it comes to large project planning. Hotel data, there's a little bit of a bump. It's not as strong as it was for the other project types, especially when it comes to the projects over 100 million. But still, when you go, we know that a lot of your branded hotels come in around 4 to 5 million, depending on their size. A lot of them are 8 to 9 million. We all know that there's a wide range in value in terms of hotel planning and construction. But you do see a jump in terms of hotels that are planned between 5 and 25 million, from 122 to 146. There's also a little bit of a jump from 25 to 100 million, and a slight jump in ones over 100 million. Again, we just went over this data. Our data tracks pretty closely with the data that's been presented by the Census Bureau. I think that's a good sign that Construct to Lead research team is actually being very thorough and being very scientific in their approach. When our states match, when our big states in terms of project generation match the population movements in the country, that tells me that our team is it's on the heels of where people are moving and where we're actually seeing new construction. Of course, the big reveal in this one was that Florida is now ahead of California in new project planning for this year. But that being said, if you have a business in California on the West Coast, that's not necessarily a negative sign, because California itself, even though Florida has overtaken it, California is still over 200 projects. There are over 200 projects more than there were for the same time period for last year. And again, multifamily residential continues to lead the way in all of our project planning. Now, since I have everyone here, since I kind of went through things a little bit faster than I planned, I'll just read some additional statistics that I pulled before the meeting started. Industrial, I think my webinar at the end of 2021 was on industrial planning. As we all know, there's an extreme logistics crisis in this country. More than 96% of the logistics spaces are currently being leased. And the ones that aren't leased are probably in process being negotiated for. We know there's a giant logistics crisis, and so companies are scrambling to build as much warehouse space as they can. This year, we have 1,775 industrial projects in our system for this same time period. I think that we will be able to get more as we move into the spring. We also have some of our researchers who handled a lot of our industrial portfolio. They had some time off for this spring too. So that number is probably going to jump to 2,000 fairly soon. And I think that it's highly likely that this will be another year where industrial is kind of just behind residential in terms of these major large projects again. We have 948 office projects as of just a few minutes ago. Now keep in mind that office projects are not all office towers. In fact, we don't see that many of those outside of Texas and some of the southern states anymore. A lot of these are your small offices or office renovations, but that's still an improvement over last year, and so that's a good sign. Hotels, again, we're at 344 for the year as of about an hour ago. That's higher than it was last year. We just went through a lot of that data. Medical is at 809 for the year. Restaurant, we were just under 1,000 when I wrote these numbers down. We're probably over 1,000 right now. Retail, we're just under 2,500. Keep in mind that this year we also have added a few new project types that we added in the middle of last year, including research buildings, bar and club And we developed several subtypes that you can find now under residential and medical. They break residential projects down into categories like student housing, senior housing, and other affordable housing. When it comes to medical, we have several new categories, subcategories, including assisted living, clinics, inpatient behavioral care, many categories. So as you're using the Constructively product, you'll be able to dice up things in more detail and find the exact projects that you're looking for. And we've also, as many of you know, at the end of the summer of last year, we started adding projects from Canada. Now, for the sake of this, this webinar, I included all the Canadian provincial data in together, but you can sort the Canadian projects the same way you can US projects by province instead of state, and by city as well, and value and all the other categories. And in fact, if I were to have presented all the provinces as individual states, Ontario would have come in just about in the same area as Arizona has so far. So Ontario, British Columbia, obviously are very strong. We've seen a pickup in their project planning the last 2 months. Canada started off the year kind of slow, but Canada also is opening up a little bit, and that's encouraging more development. We've actually seen a pickup in hotels again in Canada, which is a good sign, even though last year almost everything we did up there was large multifamily projects. So at this point, we've kind of, all right, and finally, if you have any additional questions, and any at all, even if you have research-related questions, you can address them to our sales manager, Brett, and he will then forward them on to me. If you have any sales or purchasing questions, please ask Brett about them. His email is brett.moser@constructively.com. His office number is 855-874-1491, and his mobile is 224-358-9203. If you have a question for me later on, when you think of it, feel free to email Brett about it and pass it on to me, and I'll get back to you, or I'll get back to you through one of our salespeople. But if any of you have any questions right now, I know we went through a lot of data in a short amount of time, excuse me, and some people joined the meeting late. If you have any questions for me, this is the time to kind of unmute your mic and shoot away. We can move back to any of the earlier slides if you want and review the data, or we can talk about any of the data that I pulled up just before the meeting began. So is there anyone who has any questions about anything? All right, and feel free to, to go through, to ask any questions you want after the meeting, and again, email Brett about them. And again, the bottom line, the thing to take away here is that we're seeing an increase in project planning. And more importantly, we're seeing an increase in major project planning. I'll go back to that page here. We're seeing a major increase in substantial, that's hotels. We're seeing a major increase in substantial project planning. So that's the big takeaway from today. All right, everyone, if no one has any questions, I'm going to shut down the meeting. I thank all of you for attending. I know everyone's very busy and you have a lot of work to get to. So I appreciate your time. And I look forward to maybe seeing you down the road at another webinar. And again, we'll have a bulletin coming out in a few days. Some of the data I'll be talking about in that bulletin from my article for the bulletin might look a little bit different than the data I presented here. That's because I wrote the bulletin article a day or two ago. So of course, it involves more data. And I'll cover things that I didn't cover in this webinar. But again, the themes will be the same, that we've seen a little bit of resurgence in some of the hospitality related planning, and we've seen a significant surge in value planning. So I'm going to close the meeting, and again, have a great day, and I'll talk to all of you later on.